I woke up sometime after I had entered my room, the room of the lodge I was staying at. My hips, legs, and feet were numb with a strange sensation, which would sharply intensify, manifesting into pain upon any degree of movement from those parts. I wasn't paralyzed, but even so, crawling to the bathroom was quite the adventurous struggle. Though I had some water and food on hand, I barely partook. I slept and awoke in sporadic cycles, losing track of time as I remained in that room for the next week. Eventually, I began to have dreams. These dreams were unlike any I had experienced up to that time. The characters I had created, representing my dominators, began to take on surreal forms, and stories began to take shape, giving them further dimension. I had brought empty notebooks with me on my journey, so when I was awake, I would write, detailing to the best of my ability what I saw, felt, and experienced. I'm not certain I still have those writings, but I can share with you some of the things I wrote about. One of the dreams I had and wrote about had nothing to do with my dominators. I watched the universe expand and collapse in cycles, repetitiously, which likened itself to that of a beating heart. The story of the dream followed the lore of a father and 3 of his sons. The father would send his sons out to play. In exchange, the sons would tell their father stories about their adventures, granting their father knowledge. During the time his sons would slumber, he would craft toys and gifts, things the father suspected his sons would enjoy on their adventures. But one day, the father's sons returned home injured, wounded in a manner that shocked and scared their father. The father was deeply concerned about the future of his sons and of himself, as he feared that the wonderful stories he had heard from his sons would cease. But despite their injuries, the children seemed determined to return, once again, to their adventures. So, as his children slept and recovered from their wounds, the father went to work, crafting a plan. The father hoped that he could discover what had caused his children to have become injured, and either remove the thing that caused his children harm from existence, or grant his children some way to overcome it so they wouldn't have to return to him injured ever again. Another dream followed the story of Faith, a precarnate or alternative personality of fear, as she navigated the fractured mindspace of Odamus. She was searching for information regarding a disaster or miracle that occurred in a previous iteration of Odamus's mindspace, where a city was plunged underground to protect it from inhabitants on the surface. These inhabitants had been infected by invaders of unknown origin. As she discovers, feels, and begins utilizing her powers, she discovers that she, among the other guardians, are not immune to this mysterious force of infection, and she is confronted by Vigilance, a precarnate or alternative personality of vengeance. Due to the infection's effects, Vigilance perceives Faith as a threat and attempts to suppress and, if possible, destroy her. Serenity, a precarnate or alternative personality of servitude, was nowhere to be found at the time, but it was likely that she was the warden of a prison of sorts. In this prison, both Fear and Vengeance were incarcerated. Their bodies were immobilized, while their minds were allowed the freedom to live as their precarnations, in an attempt to naturally cure their infections. When the process of writing my thoughts was too taxing for me, I began listening to music and watching videos. Eventually, I recovered enough strength to exit my room and re-enter the world from which I had retreated from. I hadn't yet given up on my attempts to cross the country. It was clear to me that I needed more training, more endurance, and perhaps better equipment and supplies. But more importantly, I needed to rest and recover. During such times, I would need an income to support my lodging and dietary needs. I began searching. Work wasn't easy to find, and I found myself being occupied with the completion of labor tasks that didn't pay anything. My reasoning, at the time, for taking on such tasks was to demonstrate a willingness to work. In the meantime, I managed to find another room to rent, much cheaper than the one offered by the lodge. Eventually, an employment service managed to connect me with a grocery store position as a clerk in one of their departments. I managed to work for them approximately 2 weeks before I was struck with illness. I wore a mask and returned to work regardless, but the owner refused me and told me to return once I had completely recovered. It took 2 weeks before the illness had completely subsided. I returned to work, and my daily routines in that town began to establish themselves. In a vision, I saw statues likened to that of humanity. Black and hollow they were, and faded like shadows where they outlined. One by one they appeared. Each successive statue was arrayed against its former, positioned as if to deal out a killing blow. As I watched the statues reveal themselves, it seemed as though each new array not only threatened to destroy its enemies, but to neutralize the threat of a previous one. Soon enough, I was surrounded by numerous statues set up to eliminate one another the moment time returned. No statue could be identified as the instigator of this conflict. Suddenly, my attention was drawn to a new statue having just appeared from amongst the others. Its array spoke volumes of an impending danger, its feet braced by way of the shoulders as if to withstand a powerful blast, its mouth wielding the words of a shout, a warning to all that would hear. Its arm outstretched, pointing out, arrayed with its brace, directing all eyes to the threat before them. My vision shifted, following the direction this statue was attending. My eyes were met by the sight of a gigantic creature towering in the distance, whose rolling hills gave witness to its mass. My vision shifted in closer to the creature, only to be shuddered violently by its inaudible screech. My vision changed in reaction to this opposition. My aura braced itself, tensifying in resistance to the creature's attempts to breach my will, a broadcast of brutish intention. My vision shifted back to the battlefield of still-bound statues, observing a number of them for just a moment, at close proximity. It seemed that the creature had reaped the attention of all who could witness its being, though their weapons of war maintained their poise. In this moment, I could feel the edge of my aura detecting something submissioned within the creature's broadcast screams, something alluring, yet elusive. I then witnessed a change within the statues as if my vision had been interrupted by the flow of time. The change was different between each statue my vision re-witnessed, but with each successive display I understood this creature's influence. Each statue showed signs of destitution, as if another conflict had consumed their minds, overwhelming their perception. Even their arrays, filled with intention and purpose, had been broken by this sudden affliction. What power was this, held by the mere voice of an unknown creature? Within moments, the thrashings of an undefined battle turned towards a fatal deconstruction of grim inevitability as the creature's power reigned supreme over the still-bound statue-like masses. However, just as quickly as this power had been witnessed, another took stage. I felt a strong and unyielding presence pressure my aura, nearly overwhelming my senses, as my vision shifted into proximity of a new statue. Stalwart and powerful, its array boldly proclaimed. Its feet braced the ground as the one did before, but volumes of a different kind were expressed here. The one that came before was a glimpse of terror reflective of its witness, a herald of sorts. This new statue was no herald. Its stance was not defensive, but aggressive, leaning in towards its enemy, unfazed, ready to charge down the threat. Its mouth armed with a shout, demanding the presence of all ears across the fields of battle, and shattering the bonds of affliction that deafened its audience. As my soul was shaken, I witnessed another statue following close behind. Shielded by the stalwart presence before it, a standard of battle had been raised to the sky, towering twice their height. I was unable to identify the standard. Its bearer had no voice, as its sole purpose seemed to be the presentation of its banner, like a beacon of light in a dark sky. But a beacon for what? The answer was made clear as my vision shifted to reveal the third statue. As if following the charge led by the stalwart one, its weapon of war was raised to the sky, following it forward, as if the statue beckoned the others to join in battle. Its mouth was armed with a battle cry, submissioning the scattered statues about to join in ranks and destroy the enemy before them. It was then that I felt a presence stirring at the edge of my aura. My vision shifted to reveal the creature preparing to retaliate. The trio's efforts had not gone unnoticed. As I closed into proximity of the creature, I felt an invisible force rampage past me, tapping my aura. The force was so strong that my entire physical body was shaken, piercing the protective layer I supposed my vision would provide. The presentation before me chilled my nerves. I sensed this brutish force gather towards the creature's front, creating an array seething with its intention. Just as the creature had broadcast its intention before, it seemed that the creature would now focus its power over the resistance before it. The creature roared, accelerating its intention towards the battlefield below. As before, no sound could be heard from the creature's mouth, but this was of little significance. The creature's bellowing was so powerful it shook the atmosphere violently. Even outside of the creature's field of intention, I feared my essence would surrender to the creature, as I felt it pulling away from my physical body, attempting to escape such a suppressive force. I was in shock, witnessing such a terrifying show of force. With this attack, the trio, and all who stood with them, would undoubtedly be severed from their essence, dead to this world. My vision was captivated, drawn into the devastation inevitably etching its way into my mind. Terrifying yet alluring, my focus could not be shifted away from the creature's hypnotic effect. As its intention struck the plains before it, I watched as the statue suffered its effects. Some suffered in agony, unable to accept its influence. Others posed lifelessly as if purpose had been torn from them. And some. It was then that my violent hypnosis was shattered, and the rumbling atmosphere ceased to quake again. The creature's streaming intention, forceful, powerful, and straightforward, buckled and twisted. The reaction was violent, yet uneased, resistant yet stiff, like a freezing serpent having been severed at its head. The stream of intention writhed as if met by unthinkable strength and reeling from the blow. Within moments of this display, the creature's intention shattered. There was a short calm, allowing me to collect myself. The seemingly unstoppable force had been met. My vision shifted towards the stalwart one. Evidence seemed to show his part in shattering the creature's influence. My vision shifted to the warrior in back as he called the statues to arms. I witnessed a change in the other statues. My vision drew witness to their faces. I remembered witnessing the expression of their eyes, but am unable to recall it. It's as if my conscious mind had been robbed of its memory. One thing remained clear: these broken souls were given new purpose and readied for war. My vision jumped back to the creature as I watched it undergo a transformation. As white light blinded the battlefield, the creature was covered from visibility. As the light cover retreated into nothingness, I witnessed the change. It posed straight and tall, at attention, as if waiting for its master's orders. Its shape and size remained imposing, yet ordained, as though serving a noble cause. Atop its head stood a humanoid figure, unbound by time as the other figures were. He spoke to the masses before him with powerful and challenging intent. As he spoke, my vision shifted over the hills, past the creature witnessed, and beyond. I was met by rows and columns, sections of sections, all of which creatures to be challenged. My heart sank with these final words. This is your fight. Your fight alone. My life in this new place was complicated, at best. What was supposed to be a short resupply turned into something much more. A new life, a new opportunity for my old existence. The new room I was renting was small and cramped, but it had a bed and electrical outlets I could use to charge my phone. And at the time, that was all I needed. They even allowed me to keep their old toaster oven in my room so I could cook my own meals in private. But the peace of my new life was not simple to maintain. Indeed, it felt like a fight. So much effort, with little in return. My boss, the manager of the department I clerked in, appeared to have little sympathy for my extended leave due to illness. In fact, it felt like I was being pressured to do my best to make up for my shortfall in attendance. I felt that my job security would be in jeopardy should I speak up or make mention of my unusual increase in demand. I say increase in demand because one symptom of my unusual circumstances were an increase in the number of jobs I was requested to perform, both within and without my department. Most of note were cleaning jobs. Most of the time, I had no idea what was expected of me, especially when cleaning, and I suspected that should one of my tasks be poorly completed, I would be fired immediately, without opportunity for an appeal. I had to guess what questions I was allowed to ask, and reserve my other questions for times when I felt it was possible to subliminally extract the information through a separate, less invasive, less direct line of questioning. Hide my emotions, hide my struggles. It was happening again. My ancient safety protocols were finding their way into the modern age of my present life. I performed my given tasks and roles unquestioningly, for the most part. I would occasionally offer my opinion or suggestions when it seemed safe to do so, but often it didn't feel like such things were much use to them. But I suppose I did it for my benefit. If I was to be trapped by my circumstances, I would at least give myself some illusion of independence and indispensable value. It was clear to me that the effort I was putting into my life was not being returned to me in suitable quantities. But despite this, I decided to continue with my progression and hope that eventually things would pay out. I would push forward, faking my happiness until happiness would finally reward me. But things never really got better. I had been staying at my current residence for many months now. My landlord and her children lived in that house, with her boyfriend, often frequenting visits. My room was adjacent to their living room, and for the most part, there was little that could disturb me. But as time went on, my workplace was becoming more taxing on my emotions and my ability to relax at home. Rather, in my room was deteriorating. I was ailed in my room one day, attempting to rest in peace, when my landlord's children began yelling and causing a ruckus. I exited my room and begged them to keep the noise down. My pleas were disregarded as the disturbance returned. I opened the door with force this time and shouted in protest, but was quickly interdicted by my landlord's boyfriend, standing in the next room. He labeled me as a tenant, which had no right to security within their home, even from children yelling at each other just outside my door. I had had enough. I cried and grieved at the loss of my residence, even though he didn't actually have the power or right to evict me. I called my landlord and told her I had to move out. She was confused, and I don't think she ever fully understood why I left. And I was too horrified and emotionally overwhelmed to try and reconcile the situation. I moved out, returning to the lodge I had previously stayed at, and searched for a new residence. I eventually found another to call home, a small, cramped apartment with barely the square footage to equal that of a small living room. I liked it, at least for a while. My neighbor's child downstairs would find common occasion to cry uncontrollably throughout the nights. The fire detectors were wired in such a way that any power outages would trigger them. The breaker box was inaccessible to me, meaning that fire detectors were dysfunctional until someone could access it. The eave troughs were blocked, causing water to leak in through the roof. This wasn't obvious until after the winter, when the rainy season and spring started up. Work was already stressful, and the guise I used to hide that truth taxing. But now, my own home was invading and violating my respite. But there was one more thing, something that caught me completely off guard, and I hadn't realized would hurt me until it was too late. During my time working at the grocery store, I had managed to get training as a cashier. This was done so that I could cover for missing cashier personnel during rushes of customers. I had very little interaction with females throughout my life, and since most female employees were cashiers, it helped me to initiate interactions with them. One of these female employees caught my eye, and her mannerisms, appearance, and figure, as modest as they were, seemed to have me spellbound. I befriended her, not really considering what I was feeling. Additionally, I found myself wanting to go out to the many restaurants and places of interest throughout the town. I was convinced that visiting them alone would be boring and wasteful, so it only made sense to visit them with other people, even if only one of the invitees would come. We talked and hung out together. I opened up about my thoughts, and we spoke about a variety of subjects, even intimate ones. But it seemed that I was her friend, not a boyfriend. The truth is, up to that time, I had never really considered the possibility that I was in love with this girl. I mean, I only really thought about going out to restaurants with other people, usually her, because I had lots of money and very low expenditures, and I wanted opportunities to become social, which I happened to have with her. Up to that time, everything was fine. And then, once I considered that my spellbound captivation with her presence could actually be love, it hurt. A lot. Up to that time, my time, in that town, I had been holding myself together with hope for the future. But that false hope was now a burden, and I was finally collapsing under the weight of my labors. I resigned from work and requested my father's help in evacuating myself from this town. The night was dark and late when transport arrived. We worked throughout the night, packing my things into the vehicle. By midnight, the apartment was abandoned. I escaped into the night, from that town, but not from myself. Thank you for listening in. Have a wonderful day.